Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to Using DevExtreme with TypeScript and Angular, presented by DevExpress CTO Julian Bucknall and DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. In this session, they will show how to use DevExtreme widgets inside Ionic framework, along with TypeScript and Angular2. Join Paul and Julian as they discuss the tips and tricks of developing an application with these other technologies. FYI, this session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later. And we will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul and Julian. Good morning, guys.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the DevExtreme TypeScript Angular2 Ionic presentation. Now, Mr. Bucknall, if the technology gods are being good to us today, then you should be on the call.
I thought I'd leave it a bit before I said hello, just to get you worried. Hello, Paul, and of course, hello, everybody, and welcome to this very interesting webinar. It's full of beta technology, and it's just amazing that it all works.
Or did.
Or did work.
Yeah. Now, we do have a number of our boffins support with us today, so they will be helping out answer some questions. And with that, I want to make a quick happy birthday mention to Alexander, who works tirelessly on this stuff along with everybody else. So I thought I'd throw that in there.
Happy birthday,
now,
Alex. Yeah.
Now, Julian, you're a bit of a known authority when it comes to JavaScript. You've written a number of blog posts on best practices and how to do things. You've helped author a book, and you've pretty much got a status of JavaScript guru. So how are you going to cope with TypeScript today?
Actually, I've been looking at TypeScript over the past, 6 months or something like that. It's interesting. I've been using it off and on, probably mostly off, but it's interesting to play around with, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I could see the attraction for, say, an object-oriented programmer coming from C# to the client-side world. TypeScript does save you from a lot of big problems if you're just writing straight JavaScript.
Now, I know that some people would consider that if you're not writing in TypeScript, you're burning money or you're simply not being productive. And there's quite a few people in that camp. So I thought what we'd do is we'd start out by taking a quick primer or a quick look into TypeScript and Angular, have a quick discussion on things like the Ionic framework and the DevExtreme widgets. But one thing that comes up regularly when I start talking about Angular, Angular2, the question people say is, why would I bother choosing Angular2 over existing frameworks such as Knockout? How would you answer that?
Well, let me just approach it from a different angle, perhaps. When we started writing DevExtreme, we decided early on to create DevExtreme to work with a model view model type architecture, so an MVVM architecture. We chose Knockout originally. It was a well-known MVVM framework, worked really well, and we then added things like Angular. So Knockout essentially just gives you a binding to your model from the view. So you have your view, which is the markup. You type in some special attributes into your elements and your tags, and Knockout does the work of calling your view model, and your view model which you write gets the data and passes it back and so on and so forth. So you have a nice kind of a MVVM type thing, and it works really well. Angular 2 actually gives you a whole lot more. So DevExtreme is, I'm sure you well know, is a set of widgets, a set of widgets. They all work independently of anything else. And then B, there is a single page application framework, a SPA. And you can actually use the widgets without using the SPA. And this is where Angular 2 comes in. It gives you things that we actually provide in DevExtreme SPA, things like routing. It provides dependency injection. It gives you the ability to build your production code, so minification of your JavaScript and bundling and so on and so forth. A lot easier to add internationalization, and there's built-in support for things like testing, unit testing and end-to-end testing and all that. And that's all right in Angular 2 out of the box. With Knockout, essentially you were kind of wiring all that kind of stuff up yourself. And the great thing about Angular then, Angular 2, is it makes things a lot easier and hence a lot faster. And it's not just this big, huge framework stuck on top. It's very rapid, nice performance, and it basically enables you to create these complex UIs very easily, very simply. And we'll see some of that right now with, well, a little later on in the webinar with DevExtreme's widgets. And yeah, there's also things like native mobile, there's native OS 10, or maybe I should call that Mac OS now, I don't know, Linux and Windows apps. We're going to be using Ionic, which is ironic, perhaps? Why Ionic?
Well, you mentioned a couple of things there, Julian. Number one is that, yes, DevExtreme has its own SPA framework. But one of the things that we want to make sure people fully understand is that the DevExtreme widgets can be used outside of that scope. They can be used with normal web applications. They can be used in frameworks such as Ionic. And when we were looking at different ideas to plug the widgets into, and we were looking at what Ionic's been used in, it's had over nearly 2.5 million apps produced with it. So one of the things I wanted to do was just really shout out, I suppose, the fact that we are primarily a vendor component or a component vendor company, that our widgets are cross-platform, but in particular today the JavaScript widgets can be used in large frameworks like Ionic and perform really well, that we've got support for Angular 2. It's not yet officially available, but we're not sitting back on our laurels. We're pushing those boundaries. We're at the forefront working with the cutting edge or the bleeding edge technologies to make sure that our products are going to be available for use in those items. Now, what we'll do is we'll step through a little bit of a TypeScript primer, and I'll talk about a little bit about the architecture and Angular 2 app, and then we'll have a look at the Ionic framework and then see just how easy it is to start adding in the DevExtreme widgets into that platform. We'll then talk about or show you some links, etc., where you can start heading from there and see what questions have been happening in the background. Hopefully nothing too difficult for me to answer, because technically I'm already in July.
That's true, yes. You are in Australia, which is already tomorrow. So, well, what's July like? Yes.
Cold at the moment. Now, TypeScript. There's a couple of things I want to just view, I suppose, here. One is some benefits and features of TypeScript. Now, according to the TypeScript Lang website, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. And in fact, when the TypeScript compiler runs in the background, it's not really a compiler as such, but more of a transpiler. It's generating raw JavaScript and doing a really good job of it. One of the benefits, I think, certainly from, and you called out to this before, but certainly from developers moving from server-side technologies over to client-side, is that it provides a safety net and stops us making rookie JavaScript mistakes. Now, as I pointed out before, you have been in this JavaScript world for probably since I was, knee-high to a grasshopper, and it's something that just comes naturally for you. But there's a lot of things that we expect as coming from a .NET background that just is not simple in JavaScript. So it certainly helps with that. TypeScript has the benefit of working with any browser, any host, and any operating system. TypeScript itself is open source, and by that I don't just mean the TypeScript language, but the compiler, all of it has been open source. So, you know, as I think you mentioned earlier, Julian, you can make pull requests, you can ask for features, you can help with open bugs, things like that. It is a great community around it, and it's gone from strength to strength. And I think you were telling me about the whole Angular 2 approach is written in TypeScript?
Indeed, that's the kind of one of the big interesting things about this. Angular 2, or Angular, is being written by a team at Google, and Angular was written in JavaScript originally, but for Angular 2 they decided to embrace TypeScript, so they basically rewrote it all in TypeScript, and in doing so, when I say rewrote it, the TypeScript compiler will compile JavaScript to JavaScript, so you don't have to do anything to begin with. You just rename your file to a TS file, and already you're writing TypeScript. But in converting it to TypeScript, they found bugs in Angular itself, where they were passing things around which shouldn't have been passed around. The type checking abilities of TypeScript helped them find errors in their JavaScript code.
So some of the features of TypeScript: static typing, big thing. The ability to implement classes and modules, encapsulation, support for constructors, working with interfaces. You've got support for fat arrows, otherwise known as...
Love fat arrows, I really do. That's the one thing.
That's part of, obviously, the ECMAScript 6 sort of functionality, but we can use it in TypeScript now, and it gets transpiled to something that works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to jump in and have a look at a very quick TypeScript example. So I'm going to do that just using Visual Studio, and here I've got just a blank project. You can see that there's no other files in here, it's just one I created. And what we're going to do is come down and just create a new file with TypeScript. Of course, anybody in the development sort of sector would know that Microsoft released their latest update for Visual Studio this week. There's always package updates going on, and sometimes it is a real nightmare to try and stay on top of some of this stuff. So I'm going to do the world's simplest TypeScript example, just so that you can see how the transpiler works and what JavaScript is generated in the background. So I'm going to create a file called greeter.ts. You'll notice that Visual Studio straight away understands that the TypeScript support is added in, and the fact that there is this icon representation. I'm going to refresh my project. All I've done so far is create it and press save, and you can see that already a .js file has been generated. So the TypeScript compiler service is running in the background and looking after that. On the left-hand window here, I'm going to start by generating a small class, and we'll call it just a greeter. Now, this code example is by no way anything super special, and I'm not going to claim the kudos for it either. It's one that you will find on the TypeScript website. But I'm creating a class in a way that I'd be more familiar with. I've added a property called greeting, and I've set the type of that property as a string. I'm going to use the constructor element, and you can see the IntelliSense happening here. You've got this superb support for tooling, whether it be in VS Code, Visual Studio, or other IDEs. I'm going to pass in a parameter called message, and again I'm going to type that as a string. Now, inside my constructor, I'm going to say this greeting equals message, and then I'm going to create a new method. One of the nice things here is I don't have to put function or anything in front of it. I can just give it a method name, and inside here I'm going to return hello plus this greeting, like so, and all my brackets are there. I'm going to now just press save, and on the right hand side we're going to see what a really nice job already the TypeScript compiler is doing. Julian, you can explain the .js file away.
So in the left-hand side is a very sort of classic looking class definition, and as you can see on the right-hand side, what the transpiler does is to convert it into the JavaScript equivalent. The JavaScript equivalent is a class is actually a constructor. That's what, or a simple function, and that's what essentially the JavaScript is doing here. It's actually doing even something even worse. It's creating a function which is a return from immediately executing another function, and all of the interesting stuff is happening inside that first function. So it's you know, if you're coming from a server side, you're used to C# and you see that right-hand side, you're going to go, what the heck is going on here? Whereas on the left-hand side, the TypeScript is a lot easier to understand and a lot simpler to, you know, extend. You know, it also allows you to use inheritance, and much easier. You try and do inheritance with pure JavaScript functions, it's a real mess. It really is. Anyway, you're doing a little bit of code there, which is kind of interesting. What's going on?
Well, one of the cool things that we mentioned is the fact that you can mix and match JavaScript and TypeScript in a single file. So what I've done is just added a function to the onload event on window that's going to add or use that class. It's going to implement the greeter class. It's going to add a button that will then fire it using your favorite example of all, the alert function.
Oh, the alert function, yes. Mm.
Now, I press save on that, and you can see straight away that the transpiler is quite happy. It's just going to add that JavaScript straight across. But there is something, just one tiny little difference there, isn't there?
There is indeed. On the left-hand side, you're actually using the let keyword, which is ECMAScript 6. Excuse me while I put my false teeth back in. And the let keyword is going to be converted over to var. This is one of those, the let keyword is essentially for creating local variables, so you're not going to be touching the global scope. So it gets converted over to var. That's one of the typos you always do in JavaScript, whether you've been doing it for a long time or not, is you forget the var keyword on something. And TypeScript will actually warn you.
Now, I've purposely used a mix of single quotes and double quotes, which in JavaScript world really doesn't matter. You're going to start complaining about standards and all those things, I understand. But when it comes to Angular 2 and working with bindings and things, it's something you really have to watch. So I just want to make that mention. Now here, what I've done, sorry, were you going to add something there, Julian?
No. I think you're quite right. The recommendation is to standardize on either single quotes or double quotes. And it really makes a difference with Angular 2, as we'll see.
Now here, whilst I'm using Visual Studio, straight HTML, and my JavaScript, which came from my compiled, transpiled TypeScript, I've just brought in the greeter class or file into here, and I'm going to start. And if all things are working as they should, I should have a nice little page pop up with a button, say hello, and boom, there's my code executed. As I said, world's simplest example as far as what TypeScript I've used, but it gets you straight into that idea that it's what's going on in the background. And doing it like this is a great way to learn more about JavaScript, because for me, writing the code on the left is more of a natural way of thinking about my code. Seeing how it's going to be actually run on the browser gives me a lot more understanding as to what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It does emphasize the fact that TypeScript is a strict superset of JavaScript. JavaScript is TypeScript. It will be compiled and so on.
So let's take a quick look at Angular 2 then. One of the really nice things with Angular 2 is the fact that you've got expressive HTML. You can utilize conditions, if conditions inside your markup. You can utilize loops and set local variables. It's got a very powerful data binding system, which, coupled with the built-in back-end integration, makes for some really lightweight but powerful data manipulation. Now, when Angular 2 was redesigned, they set it up to be modular by design, more so than ever before. That is part of the reason that it will perform as well as it does. The entire thing is built for speed. We're going to see in just a second with a diagram how an Angular 2 application is compiled or comprised of multiple components. And because of that, because of the binding and the updating, it provides such a responsive front end for the customer. What's really, really nice is the fact that Angular 2 supports not only the latest cutting-edge browsers, but legacy browsers as well. In fact, it goes all the way back to IE 9. Yes, 9.
No. Update.
And of course, it provides a simplified API, making the implementation and learning curves a fair bit easier. So what does the anatomy of an Angular 2 application look like? If picture your application as comprised, and you mentioned earlier about the complex UIs made easier to work with, and that's done through this combination of components. So an application will be made up of a component plus a component, and a component can be made up of multiple components. But with that, you get so much more code reuse. This, coupled with integration of services, makes the whole thing just work as seamlessly and clean and crisp as possible. And of course, the other really nice thing with Angular 2 is its scalability. Unlike traditional JavaScript, where unless you've got a lot of practices in place and you've got some experienced guys, starting to scale applications is just not that easy. Angular 2's concept is that, yes, it will be a lot simpler for scalability. Well, what's a component actually comprised of then? Well, each component has three main parts. It's got the template, it's then got the class information, which is your typical properties and methods, and some metadata to tell you what's going on. And when we start stepping through the Ionic framework example with Angular 2, you'll see how some of this comes together. We talked about the Ionic framework a little bit before. According to the website, there's more than 2.4 million apps published using Ionic. It's used by millions of developers in many, many countries around the world. As with, we're doing a lot more with CLIs these days. We're using Node, we're using NPM, we're using the Angular 2 CLI. Ionic has its own CLI as well.
What does CLI stand for? Come on.
Command line interface.
Oh.
That goes back to my Amiga days.
The command line, yes, indeed.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting over the years, especially if you've been around long enough to remember Windows 3 and moving through all the different items, we've gone back to this. Command line is faster and easier to work with than GUI. The other thing with the Ionic framework is it works very closely with Cordova and PhoneGap, providing some really nice wrappers. In fact, I was hoping to demonstrate some of this stuff on my Mac today, but with some of the changes with NPM and Angular, that's not going to be possible. But it's one command line to launch an application into the iOS simulator on my Mac, and it just is so clean and easy to work with. And then, of course, we've got what is our bread and butter, DevExtreme. Taking away the SPA framework part of it just for a second, we're talking about a really rich set of touch-enabled JavaScript widgets that you can use in not just SPA-style applications, but across any other application you might be building, whether it's just straight desktop or whether you're targeting mobile devices. Inside the DevExtreme toolkit, we've got the data grid, the pivot grid. We've got some beautiful charts and data visualization. There's a whole host of form widgets for making your life easy. There's the new scheduler and calendar control. We've got the SPA framework, which is a very powerful framework, and there's a lot of integration directly in Visual Studio and build tools, other things like that. But as we pointed out, we want to be known as well for the fact that our widgets can be used outside the Microsoft world, outside the Windows, not necessarily the Microsoft world, but the Windows world. And you don't need to be using Visual Studio to get the benefit of all those tools. So how about we start putting something together?
Absolutely. Demo time.
Now, there are some prerequisites when you start working with some of these things. You need to have Node.js installed. You need to have an understanding about the NPM or Node Package Manager, because a lot of stuff that you're going to be doing works on the command line, as we mentioned before. Yes, I use a DOS prompt that has a white background and black writing. I prefer the whiteboard to the blackboard. Now, if you've got NPM installed, there's plenty of websites there telling you how to do that or how to get Node installed if you haven't. Once you've got set up for that, installing the Ionic framework is as simple as typing npm install -g and then Ionic at beta. Now the at beta part is important because the version 2 of their product is looking really, really good. It's required to work if you want to do Angular2, and their documentations, etc., all support it. Now the -g in this sense, Julian?
Means global. In other words, you're going to be installing it globally on your system, so it's going to be available anywhere at any prompt. So you're not going to be installing it locally. That's the other way of doing it. We want Ionic to be, available for projects, so let's install it globally.
So once you've installed Ionic, you get access to the command line. So here I could say, I want to start working with a simple tutorial sample that they provide, and there's a number that they work with, but I'm going to use Ionic space start. I'm going to pass in the name of the sample I want to create, so I'm just going to use sample 3, and I want it based on a template called tutorial. If you omit the tutorial part, you will end up with one of their tab standard templates, which implements 2 or 3 tabs by default. And it's important that you pass in the last parameter to nominate that you want version 2 templates at this point. I'm going to actually hit enter here, but I'm not going to wait the sort of 3 to 5 minutes that it can take to install this stuff. So we can see going off in the background, it's going to go download from all the necessary places. This is the GitHub repository. Once it's done this, it's going to start installing all sorts of NPM packages as well. What I am going to do is I'm going to switch over to VS Code. Now, I prefer VS Code to some of the other things. Julian's a Sublime text man through and through, and I'm not advocating that you have to use a Microsoft product for this. I just like the feel of VS Code and does some nice things. But what we've got here is a straight download of that same template. If you were to look through the code, they've got the pages, they've got this project set up where you've got some HTML, you've got your TypeScript happening, and you've got some other files. When you first start getting into TypeScript, there's a certain amount of configuration you have to get on top of, but there are plenty of templates, plenty of boilerplates out there to help you through that. What I want to do is start by running this example so that you can see what's going on in the background. Now, when you actually have downloaded the template, mine's actually in a folder called Julian. You can see that there's all the files. If I want to see this thing running, just in my browser, I can simply type in Ionic, and I've been typing Iconic for some strange reason, and serve. And that's going to start the Ionic server, which does a couple of really cool things. It actually will run the example in the browser, but at the same time it's monitoring in the background any file changes. So once I've started this, we'll just wait for it to launch the browser. Browser should come up on the right hand side as soon as it's finished implementing. What's really, really cool, and we'll do a very simple example, is that I can be updating the source code inside any of my text editors. Again, I'm just going to use VS Code. we can see that this is the sample app. It's got a hamburger menu, it's a couple of pages, or I can launch the menu from this button. Select a list. It's an example of how to implement a list element, all using Angular2, all using new bindings. So it's, again, a really good way to learn some of this thing. Click on an element and it brings up a details page. And we can see from the source code on the left that we've got the main page, the detail page, and the list page. Straightforward. HTML, TypeScript, and some CSS. What I'm going to do here is come through and change the word app to application. And before I press save, let's go back to the first page. Now I'm going to press save, and we'll see that that gets updated in real time. So certainly it makes life very easy when you're building software out like that.
It certainly does. I mean, that's one of the things about writing web applications in a way is you can do things in a very stepwise manner. You know, make a little change and then refresh the browser to see what that change actually did. There's no big, huge compilation step and starting up the debugger like you have with Visual Studio. It's all very quick and easy. The turnaround is fast, let's put it like that.
Absolutely. Now, we've installed the sample. If I look inside the sample folder, it's identical to the one we're looking at on the left. We want to install the DevExtreme Angular2 framework and widgets. So to do that, inside that particular folder, I can type in install, and it would be
npm install.
Sorry, npm install.
Yes.
Must use the right CLI. So npm install, and then we're going to save local, and we want the DevExtreme Angular2. I'm going to let it go off and do that. Now, one thing you will notice, the GitHub repository is there. You'll see a lot of these peer dependencies happening, depending on what version of NPM you're running, depending on lots of other things. There's certainly no need to be alarmed with that set of messages. We have a small instruction document that will be available on how to do exactly what we're doing today, and that's just copying or removing a file and copying another few files around. For the Julian example, I've already done that. I pre-installed it so we didn't have to spend any time watching my slow internet download files. So let's see what's actually involved in then starting to embed some of those widgets inside our application. First thing we're going to do is come down to the index file, and we need to implement a couple of style sheets. So I'll come below the Ionic style sheets and just pop these two in. Now DevExtreme Mobile comes with style sheets for iOS, Android, Windows Mobile, Windows Phone, whatever it's called these days. And right now I just want to implement the common theme and the light theme. The next thing I need to do inside this file is to make reference to our JavaScript libraries themselves and one to jQuery. So here we've got the minified jQuery and the DX libraries. As far as the index page, that's all I should need to do, so I'm going to save that. You'll notice again the minute I've saved something, this page on the right is going to refresh. So if I wanted to implement a widget, let's just start by picking something really simple and showing you just how easy it is. And we'll take a button control. Why not? There's already a button on the page, but it's a good example to work with. When we move to we're working on this front page, hello Ionic, and when we move to the TypeScript file, we can see that we've already got this TypeScript definition, and it's an Angular2 application, so we can see the import statement, we can see the at component building up that template, and then we can see that we've got an export. Anything inside Angular2 is based on an import and an export. If you want to make something available, you have to export it. If you want to use it somewhere else, you've got to import it. A lot like the using statement in C# or the includes statement. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to tell the system that I want to import a DX button. and I'm going to be importing that from, you probably guessed it, Julian, DevExtreme
dash
Angular2.
In fact, this TypeScript file is showing the modularization of Angular. We're just importing the things we need inside this module, and we're going to be exporting the thing we want to export for other modules to use through the export. As you see there, the export, as Paul is still typing, the export is going to export a class called Hello Ionic Page, and it has a constructor, and that's about it.
And for this first example, that's all we actually need. Now we've already got a button on the page, so let's put our little pretty button next to that. We're going to start by saying we've got a DX button, and here we're showing an example of binding properties with Angular 2. Now if you recall, I mentioned about the single quote, double quote scenario, and this is exactly what I was talking about. For me to pop the text inside here, I've got to encase the element like so, say hello from DevExtreme, and theoretically, if I press save now, Julian,
it should work. Yeah. There we go.
On the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Exactly what we wanted. Obviously, we haven't added in any code behind there. Angular 2's got some great binding. You've got simple templates with your double curly braces, you've got rendering, you've got binding properties, you can do event handlers, two-way data binding, you've got the use of the asterisk. There's some great documentation on the Angular website, which I will provide a link for in a little while. So there we go, we can now use DevExtreme components inside our web page. But you're not going to be happy with just that, are you, Julian?
Oh no, I mean, come on, a button is just a button, you know, it's just a little bit of a drawing. Let's draw something more interesting. Let's visualize some data. Let's do a chart.
Well, at least you didn't say schedule, because otherwise I'd be freaking out.
Yeah.
Let's add a chart. Okay, well, there's a couple of cool things that we're going to have to do at this point. We've got to think about where the data is going to come from for the chart. So we're going to need some kind of a data service, which is going to start adding more of the Angular framework in there.
Mm-hmm.
Once we've got that data service, we need to then add that to this, well, we'll add it to this page anyway, but add it to the page and see what happens. So if I go a little bit quiet trying to concentrate on not making typos, then you can just jump in and talk.
Absolutely. So the first thing we need to do is add a service, I'd say, for providing the data.
Add a service. Okay, well, let's try and keep our code a little bit clean and add a new folder for our services. And so inside here, we're going to create a new file, and I'm actually sitting at my desk and I've got bananas and oranges. So let's do something fun with oranges. How many oranges can I eat in a day?
You are so healthy, Paul, so healthy.
Well, if I was healthy, I would have eaten them.
Right.
Let's have a think. So orange service.typescript. So here's our blank TypeScript file. Being a data service, we're going to need to do something pretty funky. So let's import injectable. And that's got to be from a particular library, and it's part of the Angular core. So Angular, I keep thinking I'm going to spell Angular wrong. Angular core. Now we're going to need a class to actually contain or hold the definition of what I want to do. So because we want to make it available elsewhere, it has to be export, and let's call it orange. Orange is the new black.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a day. We'll think about calling that Monday, Tuesday, etc. So we're going to use the strongly typed definitions of a string, and we want the number of oranges I can consume being a number. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Now I'm actually going to need some data, and I'm not going to sit and type lots of things in, so here's something I prepared a little earlier. And what we've got here is a new object called oranges, which is an array of this class called orange, and just passing in a week's worth of orange consumption.
Okay.
And then, of course, we need to make it so that we can do something else with it. So we'll go injectable, and again, we're going to export. What we've got so far is we've got our class definition of orange, and I need to get that data out somehow, so we'll create something called orange service. Please, I didn't do banana because I definitely spelled that wrong. Let's have a new method called getOrange, and its only job will be to return oranges.
This big array, yeah.
So that's nice, straightforward. We've got one import, which is the injectable class, and we've got two exports, one being our straight orange and the other being the actual data that we want to work with. So,
and talking, before you go on, talking as a JavaScript developer, I would at this point be going, oh my word, you've got a global variable there. And in fact, because we're using the modularization, these modules, oranges, the big array there, is not being exported. It's just a private variable. So you don't have to worry about that particular possibility.
And the really nice thing, of course, as you said, is that you can therefore only expose items that you want to expose in the code. And I know that it's a big bugbear of yours where the global object gets polluted by so much other stuff.
Yep, absolutely.
Now we're back to our, we'll work with the item details. We want to work on this page. We're back to our Hello Ionic page. A couple of things we're going to need to do here. We're going to need to implement the onInit
interface
from Angular core, and you want a chart. So at this point we also want to import DX, and you can see the IntelliSense here makes it really, really nice. So there's the DX chart class that's coming from the Angular2, or DevExtreme Angular2 framework. And finally, of course, we've just created the data class, and so we now need to bring that in. And we had orange service as well as the orange class itself. We've got to specify from, and that's going to be making sure I get my slashes in the right order, otherwise nothing works. Services and orange service. So there's my imports. Now I've got to do something with it. I've got my directive for my button, so I'm going to need to do something with my chart as well. And I need to also work with some providers, because obviously we're now working with some binding and some data. And so my providers will be orange service. Clear as mud so far?
Clear as mud so far. Essentially, we're just defining to Angular what we're going to import and how to use it. And now we're going to be putting in the code to actually use it. First thing is onInit is an interface, so we have to make sure that our class there does implement that interface. Notice this squiggly underline underneath Hello Ionic page. That's basically TypeScript telling us we haven't implemented onInit yet. We're just messing around with the constructor. So onInit, I believe, needs a method.
So being an Angular 2 interface, we're going to say onInit, and we'll create that, and should be this dot oranges equals this, not thus, but this dot oranges orange service. And we can see the method that we exposed with the export saying get oranges, returning the back end. What's really nice here with Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, sorry, is the fact that you've got that syntax checking as you go through, so you can see what's going on. Now I've just saved that. There's nothing happening on the right hand side yet. There's no errors. Everything should be working as is. But we're going to need to then obviously add in our markup for the chart element as well. So let's just create a new paragraph tag and think about what we might need to do for our chart. Well, we know from what we saw of the button that it's probably going to be a DX chart, and it's going to implement, so we're going to use the Angular bindings, and we're going to say data source, and I believe we call that oranges. This is where my typing fingers, and again, using the Angular style binding, we're going to series equals, and really here all we want to do is create a constructor object for passing in the series. And the series, we've got to think, we want a simple bar chart. We're going to need some basic parameters. I want an argument field. Oops, you need to spell field correctly. And the argument's going to be day, so that's the property that came off that class. We're going to need a value field, value.
So in essence, you're creating here a standard configuration object, and if our viewers actually know DevExtreme and the chart in DevExtreme, it's exactly the same kind of configuration object you'll be creating if you were using, say, Knockout, or using the DevExtreme SPA. So nothing, weird and wonderful happening here. It's just the same stuff, but we're doing it by binding through Angular instead.
Absolutely. So we've got our argument field being day, a value field being oranges, and if we think back to our orange service, that's these two properties that have been exposed through the bindings here. We have, back to our markup, we have the name of the object, we're using bar chart, and some pretty color. And of course I keep wanting to use the English version of the word color, which would definitely break it. We've closed everything off there. So if I've done everything correctly and I press save there, on the right hand side we don't see anything. This is not a bad thing though, Julian, because if we now bring up our running Ionic serve, we can see that we've got a TypeScript error. So even though we're working inside these different frameworks, it's going to help me out and say, hey Paul, you've actually got a get oranges does not exist on type orange service. So I go back to orange service, and sure enough, get orange to get oranges. And I'm going to press refresh there.
And the chart, very nice.
Chart. And to prove that what we said earlier is real, I'm going to change some of these numbers around and say 9, save that.
And here it goes.
And there's the new numbers.
Yeah. Very nice.
Very easily we've been able to implement the DevExtreme Angular2 widgets with a powerful framework such as Ionic, sitting on top of TypeScript for the language and everything that's happening there as you see in real time.
Very nice.
So that should give you a good understanding of what sort of things you can achieve in such a small amount of time with all these different frameworks, all these different moving parts coming together. So the question then is, where do you head from here? Two aspects to this. One is that in, I think, just a few weeks' time, you and I made a promise that we would show people how to implement push notifications with a DevExtreme mobile app. So that's going to be an interesting one, because that's going to build on either this example or a similar simple example with TypeScript, and from here on in, I think any presentation that you and I do will only be TypeScript, so you better sharpen the TypeScript pencil.
I will.
As far as further resources that people can use for expanding on what some of the things that we've done here today, I've put together a list of useful web pages. Obviously, DevExpress.com, great place to start, access to our examples, samples, demo center, etc. You can go straight to the DevExtreme page, which is js.devexpress.com. The TypeScriptLang.org page is a great place to get started with learning TypeScript. There's a playground that lets you start writing code and seeing Exactly the same as we did inside Visual Studio without having to install anything. You've then got the Angular IO site, which of course is the home of Angular 2. Again, some great documentation and some good samples. If you head over to GitHub, you can look at our repo, which has got examples and documentation directly for the DevExtreme Angular 2. And there's also a lot of other goodies inside the DevExpress repo. We've started pushing a lot more stuff up to GitHub for people to be having a look at. And of course, for the building the cross-platform mobile framework today, we've wanted to show you Ionic, so that's available at ionicframework.com.
Now, the other thing to warn people is what we've been showing you here is, as I said, I think right at the very start, is beta upon beta upon beta. So just be warned. Angular 2 is not released yet. In fact, release candidate 3 came out, yesterday? Something like that, which broke our code. The DevExtreme Angular 2 repo there is being updated, well, not quite hourly, but we're certainly trying to keep up to date with Angular 2 as it's released. And as you pointed out, Ionic Framework, that's version 2 beta as well. So it's all a little hairy at the moment. It'll obviously stabilize as we go through the next few days or weeks. But just to warn you, that's I'd really like to point that out. Paul and I, well, Paul's been pulling what hair he has left out as things got broken as we prepared this particular webinar. So, you know, it's a great world out there, but you need your hiking boots on.
Absolutely, and just between when we started doing some run-throughs of this presentation to today, there's been a number of updates of the frameworks that simply break things. So it's great to be on the cutting edge, but yeah, my philosophy used to be, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space. You definitely need a safety rope these days.
Yeah. So, Amanda.
Yes, hey guys.
Before we pass back to Amanda, I did promise Mr. Harry that he's got a up-and-coming presentation on tag helpers with the DevExtreme tag helpers. So check out devexpress.com/webinars to register and learn about some of that cool stuff that he's been working with.
Great. All right. It looks like all of the couple questions we had, the team already answered.
Cool.
Let's see, there is one. My question, the current 16.1 mobile app is DevExtreme but not Angular?
16.1 DevExtreme works with Knockout, works with Angular 1, or just straight jQuery, and we are essentially trying to keep up to date with Angular 2 with DevExtreme, and that's, as we showed you, it's out on GitHub, it's a repo on GitHub, so you can follow along and basically pull the code, get the code, play around with it yourself, issue pull requests if you find errors and you manage to solve them, and so on and so forth. It's that part of it which is ongoing from 16.1.
When we released 16.1, we made that repo public, so you can certainly start using it to play around with Angular 2, etc.
In fact, it's the same kind of situation as with .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. That was released Monday, and we're still updating through a repo on GitHub, our tag helpers that Mehul will be talking about later on. this month, or no, next month, and so on. It's there are lots of changes happening very quickly in this world of web programming. So although 16.1 has been released, that was at a particular point in time with regard to all these other frameworks and libraries.
Great. And then somebody asks, Angular 2 is mobile friendly. At least that's what folks tell me. Can you please explain that?
I think the point there is that being mobile friendly means using some other framework like begins with B, Strap. That's it. Yes. Using a framework like Bootstrap, even Ionic's mobile friendly. Essentially, what Angular 2 is doing is to create at runtime a whole bunch of markup. That markup is, by default mobile friendly, but you need some kind of, framework around it so that, the responsive aspects of your application work properly and so on and so forth. I don't think there's mobile friendly means anything particularly more than that.
Well, you're not
creating static HTML. You're creating, as Paul showed earlier on, components being, rendered together on a page.
And you can certainly use Angular 2 with the likes of the Ionic framework to build native mobile apps. You can use it with React Native. So as far as the framework itself goes, there's a lot of benefits. It's designed for speed and performance. So that gets wrapped up into it. The Angular.io website has got a plethora of detail on all the benefits of using or looking to move to Angular 2.
Okay, great. And then Peter asks, how should we see the combination of DevExpress and Ionic? There is no Ionic plus DevExpress bundle, is there?
Julian? Ionic is just the framework. That's essentially it. It provides the ability to create new pages, new projects from templates and so on and so forth. It uses Angular 2 to actually render the components. And what we try to show here is you're not, if you like, restricted to using DevExtreme's application framework, but the widgets themselves are available to be used in other frameworks. And that's what we were trying to basically show here is, we had a DX button, we had a DX chart, but we didn't have the whole rest of the DevExtreme framework hanging on there. We were just using the widgets themselves. So DevExtreme plus Ionic is, it comes around from DevExtreme plus Angular 2. And that's the glue, if you like, for using DevExtreme within Ionic.
All right. That looks like all the questions.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Please check out devexpress.com/webinars for all upcoming sessions and register today. Coming up July 12th, get notified with DevExtreme Mobile, also with Julian and Paul. We do have several upcoming webinars scheduled covering ASP.NET Core, DevExpress Reports, and DevExtreme Modularity Bundles, Require.js, and Webpack. And like I mentioned previously, today's webinar will also be available on our DevExpress YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat box. And that is it for this one. Thank you to Paul and Julian. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.